Hi everybody and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And today's article is all about finding this fine line between what's offensive and what's not. So let's start by thinking, what are some kind of stereotypes about the British and the Canadians that get applied to us? Are they fair? Do the British drink a lot of tea? Yeah, we kind of do. That's an accurate stereotype.
Okay, but actually Turkish people drink more tea than British people do.
There
and
we
don't
go.
meet Turkish people and go, oh, you drink tea all the time.
Yeah, that is
Right?
true.
So sometimes they're not exactly true. As a Canadian, I often get, oh, you guys say about instead of saying about, A-B-O-U-T, as Americans say. But I don't know any Canadians who say about.
Not full on.
Not like that.
It kind of
it gets, it's not the American
blurry
way,
over in the eastern bit.
But it's certainly not as strong as that. But you will meet Americans and they'll all say, the same things about people. And there might be a little bit of truth in there. British people do like their tea.
We do.
Canadians do say about a little bit, but not all the same. And that's where stereotypes can trip you up and can be insulting to people. You're taking one example and you're making it true for everyone based on not a lot of facts.
Now, I don't mind if someone says, British, you must love tea.
And I don't mind when people say that word.
Okay, but sometimes when you get into this kind of thing, you can actually really hurt someone's feelings, and we're going to explore that in today's article.
Reading.
The fine line between what's offensive and what's not. We all know that it's unacceptable to consciously offend someone simply because they are different from you. But consider these words. Since you're gay, you should meet my friend because he's gay too. Or, you're an indigenous Taiwanese, so you must have an amazing voice. On the surface, these might seem friendly, but they are actually examples of microaggressions. Microaggressions are usually used against people who belong to a group that's regularly discriminated against. This is why microaggressions are often harmful. Imagine a white American saying to an Asian, "Wow, your English is so good." At first, this might seem like a nice thing to say, but actually, it assumes all Asians can't speak English well, which of course isn't true. However, people who commit microaggressions often aren't trying to be offensive. In fact, most of us have probably accidentally committed at least one before because they're hard to detect. However, it's not too difficult to change our behavior. Next time you want to talk about someone's identity, just stop for a moment and think before you speak. If we all do this, the world might just become a more welcoming place.
So the article starts and says, we all know that it's unacceptable to consciously offend someone simply because they are different from you. So that's what a lot of this article is about, something that's not acceptable or unacceptable. If it's acceptable, then it's okay. It's not maybe the best, but it's fine. Unacceptable means not okay, something you can't do, something that's going to upset people. For example, it is unacceptable to talk loudly in a library. You'll be told shh and kicked out if you keep doing it. So what's unacceptable here is consciously upsetting or offending someone.
Right, we would say someone is rude if they are consciously offending or upsetting someone because they're doing it on purpose. If you do something consciously, you know that you're doing it. You might have decided to do it. You're certainly not surprised when someone says, hey, you're doing that. No, I know I'm doing that, all right? One thing that you might not consciously do is maybe snore when you're sleeping, right? You're asleep. You don't know what you're doing. Okay, you're making noise when you breathe, but if someone's like, oh, you're snoring, how dare you? You say, I'm not consciously doing it. I'm not doing it on purpose. So sometimes, our mind is busy. We're not really focusing on what we do. We aren't doing things consciously. But if you're being rude on purpose or consciously, then you're trying to be rude. And of course, that is not okay. Let's look at our example sentence for this word consciously. Talia had a lot on her mind, so she didn't consciously leave her keys at home. She basically forgot. She wasn't planning on doing this. She did it without thinking.
Right, and what we're talking about here is consciously offending somebody. To offend someone means to insult them, to make them feel upset and angry because what you've said is not true, it's unfair, or it's just really unpleasant and it makes you kind of want to punch them in the face or just say, like, that's rubbish. You can't say that, you can't do that. For example, Paul was offended when his friends all laughed at his new haircut and called him muffin head. So that's kind of using it partly as an adjective. We could also say Paul's friends offended him when they laughed at his new haircut and called him muffin head. He didn't like the fact they were making fun of him and calling him a nasty name or kind of an annoying name. He felt offended. He was upset that people were being rude.
Yeah, they were insulting him. They were hurting his feelings by, being rude. But consider these words, the article says. Since you're gay, you should meet my friend, because he's gay too. Okay, you're not really being, offensive. You're not offending that person consciously, but you're kind of
trying to be nasty.
No, but you're kind of saying there's one thing about you and one thing about this other guy. You should naturally be friends. And in this case, it's the fact that someone is gay. When we say someone is gay, this adjective basically means we're talking about someone who is attracted to people of the same sex. So a man who's attracted to another man, or women who are attracted to other women. That's what we would say. And yes, assuming someone just because of who they're attracted to, they should have so much in common with another person just because of who they're attracted to. It might not be the rudest thing you could do, but certainly you're taking one thing and making that kind of true for so much other stuff.
Exactly. And there's another example here of something you could say that might seem on the surface okay, but in fact it's not as polite as you'd think. The article says, or you're an indigenous Taiwanese, so you must have an amazing voice. Indigenous means you're native to a particular area or a country. So you kind of, not just you were born there, but that's where your whole family comes from. Or if it's a plant or animal, that's your native area. That's where you're found. Okay, so this kind of seems like you're being complimentary. You're being nice. Hey, you must be a great singer. But that's not true for all indigenous people. So applying that one thing to you just because that's what your background is, that's not always a polite thing to say.
That's right. Now, of course, you're not calling someone bad names. You're not making fun of them. You might even think you're saying something nice. On the surface, the article says, on the surface, if you just look at what you're saying or if you don't think about it too much, on the surface, these might seem friendly, but they are actually examples of microaggressions. When we use this phrase on the surface, we're basically saying if you only look at it and probably don't think about it too much. We're kind of talking about a person or anything that you might look at that actually goes down several layers. But if you only look at the outside layer, you would say on the surface, all right? So if you're talking about a person you don't know very much about, you might be talking about the things you see on the surface. As you get to know that person, you might discover so many different or unusual or surprising facts about them. So often when we say something, we're looking at something on the surface. We're kind of also saying we're not thinking about it too much. We're kind of making a guess based on very, very little information. And of course, when you do things like that with people who can be very complicated and very different and surprising and interesting, you might be making some mistakes.
And this is all about what's called a microaggression. And if you look this up, you'll see it's an indirect, it's kind of not obvious, but it's often unintended, but it is a kind of discrimination about a particular group. We'll kind of talk about that word discrimination in a moment.
That's right. Now the article continues, microaggressions are usually used against people who belong to a group that's regularly discriminated against. All right, now some of these things might not bother people, but if you're in a group that's been discriminated against, they might bother you a little bit more, especially if you hear them a lot and it comes with a lot of other things that people think about you even though they don't know you very well. But yes, if you've been discriminated against, or you're part of an ethnic or religious group or whatever that's been discriminated against, these things will hurt a bit more and you'll notice them more. Because to be discriminated against is basically to treat someone differently and unfairly and probably badly just because of something about them, their race, their gender, their religion. You know, if you treat girls a certain way and different from boys and think, oh, girls aren't strong, and you know, this type of person isn't as smart, or that type of person isn't as good, or something basically based on something they were born with, something that, you know, they didn't choose, whatever, that would be discrimination. You're treating them badly just because of who they are or where they come from or something like that.
Yeah, so we've got discriminate, the verb, discrimination, the noun. And we say in the article, this is why microaggressions are often harmful. This is why these kind of nice things that you think you're saying aren't really nice. We're going to explain this now with a more detailed example.
Okay, imagine a white American saying to an Asian, wow, your English is so good. All right, so this white person from America meets an Asian person. They look like they're from Taiwan or Japan or Korea or somewhere like that. And without knowing anything about them, this Asian person says a few words, and then the white person says, wow, your English is so good. All right. Doesn't necessarily mean that Asian person wasn't born in America. But okay, this is the kind of situation we're talking about. It didn't actually happen, or not that we know.
I'm sure it probably did.
It probably did, but we're not giving you an exact example. That's why we're saying imagine. All right, often when we're talking about things and we're just trying to give you the idea of something, we might ask you to imagine, because to imagine is basically to kind of create it in your mind. We're not actually showing you a film or a picture or listening to a story of a person who had this happen, but kind of pretend it happened. It probably did happen, but we're not giving you that exact example. We're just asking you to use your imagination, right? Think creatively to kind of make it up in your mind. For example, I find it hard to imagine living in a time before cars. Imagine when everyone traveled around by horse.
Yep.
There were horses everywhere and horse poop all over the street. I can't imagine what that was like. I imagine it was smelly.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah. So you're saying to this Asian person, wow, your English is great. As the article says, at first, so on the surface again, this might seem like a nice thing to say.
But actually, it assumes all Asians can speak English well, which of course isn't true. And yes, if you're an Asian person who was raised in America or whatever, your English is probably really, really good. And here we have the use of the word which as a pronoun for an entire clause, an entire idea in a sentence. And it can actually also be used as a pronoun for an entire sentence too. For example, Harry got the job instead of me, which made me feel very upset. Okay, so the clause in the first part of that sentence is that Harry got the job instead of me, and Harry getting the job instead of me made me feel very upset. So instead of repeating the same clause and pointing out that this clause, this idea, is what made me feel upset, I don't need to say that again. I just use which. Harry got the job instead of me, which made me feel very upset. Ooh, Harry.
So that's the kind of the problem here.
Yes. However, it says people who commit microaggressions often aren't trying to be offensive. As we said earlier, they're not consciously trying to insult people, to upset them, to make them feel bad, to be rude. They're committing these microaggressions unconsciously without really knowing what they're doing. When you commit something, this is a verb, basically means to do something, to act in a certain way, to perform an action. We don't use it in a very casual kind of way throughout our day. We might use it in a more formal way when we're writing or speaking about something in kind of an official way, right? Like a police officer might accuse someone of committing a crime. They did a crime. They did something illegal, but we wouldn't say they did something illegal. We might say they commit a crime, all right? So you're acting in kind of a more formal way, in a way you're kind of thinking about it, or we're discussing what you're doing in a way that shows this was an important or notable action.
If you are offensive, that's related to the word offend we looked at earlier. Someone who's offensive is deliberately rude. They're trying to say or do something to make other people feel upset or angry. Maybe they just don't care how other people feel, so they say whatever they want. So this is the idea here. You're not trying to be nasty to people, but you're maybe saying something that if you think twice about it, you wouldn't have said.
In fact, the article continues, most of us have probably accidentally committed at least one before because they're hard to detect. Yeah, a lot of people might say something not thinking about what they're saying it kind of on the surface. They're saying it unconsciously. They are accidentally committing or saying basically a microaggression. When you do something accidentally, it's kind of like doing it not consciously. You don't do it on purpose. An accident, of course, is something that happens that you didn't plan. It might be something bad or unlucky. So if you do something accidentally, you do it. You didn't want to do it. You didn't mean to do it. You didn't plan to do it. It just happened. It was an accident.
Yep, and this can happen with the way you talk because these microaggressions are hard to detect. So detect is a verb and it means to find something, to sense it, to spot it and go, aha, that's what it is. I know it, I recognize it. Maybe I've seen it before or at least heard about it, so therefore I am able to identify what that thing is. Here's an example. Can you smell that? I think I detect the scent of freshly baked cookies. I know the smell, I recognize that smell, I can identify the smell.
However, it's not too difficult to change our behavior. Yes, if you say something like this, accidentally commit a microaggression, you can change your behavior in the future, hopefully. Behavior is basically just the way you act, the way you do things, the way you behave around people, basically. Behavior is the noun, behave is the verb. When people talk about your manners, your actions, the way you seem, even your mood, even the look on your face, that kind of shows your behavior or it's part of your behavior. Parents are always focused on their kids having good behavior. You know, be polite, don't be rude, act in a certain way that people will accept or think is okay. If you have bad behavior, you might be breaking rules, you might be getting in trouble, you might be being rude to people. So we generally like to have good behavior and avoid having too much bad behavior.
So how can we change our behavior with regard to microaggressions? The article says next time you want to talk about someone's identity, just stop for a moment and think before you speak. Just kind of think, well, hang on, is what I'm about to say actually going to make them feel upset? If so, I'll just keep my mouth shut, you know, or maybe ask instead of make a statement, that kind of thing.
Think in a more kind of way. If we all do this, the world might just become a more welcoming place.
Indeed.
Yes, if we're all kind to each other and think carefully about what we say, hopefully the world will be a more welcoming, a friendlier, a nicer place to be.
And that brings us to the end of the article and our For You Chat question for today.
For You Chat.
So the question is, think of something offensive someone has said to you. How did you respond?
Well, I guess this one wouldn't be, anywhere near as offensive as some things that have been said to some people. But I think being a foreigner often in Taiwan, especially with little kids, they might see you. And I've had several times little kids might run up and they're just being friendly. They're just coming over to say hello and kind of check you out. But they'll point at you and go, 美国人, 美国人.
Oh, yep.
They kind of think every foreigner must be an American. And of course, being a Canadian, I get quite upset when you think I'm an American.
Yes, double for British people. We don't like that. Yeah. I did actually have a t-shirt that said, 我是英国人.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Chinese and in Douyin.
Oh.
Just to wear around sometimes.
I just kind of look at them and go, 真的人.
Yeah, 英国人, come on.
So not the most offensive thing, but again, they're looking at you and they're seeing one thing about you, whatever, and then they're making a big assumption, right?
Yep.
They're guessing a whole lot of stuff. They're looking only on the surface.
Yeah, and it's not just kids sometimes.
Oh, really?
I've had that from older people here and there, but generally, it's the sort of thing once they learn, okay, there's lots of countries and people can come from lots of countries. So instead of saying 美国人, they just ask, where are you from?
That's true. And actually, often when I say I'm from Canada, they're like, oh, Canada and how?
Oh, that's nice.
That's nice afterwards.
There we go. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. For English for You, I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Vocabulary Review.
Unacceptable. This essay paper is unacceptable. It's so full of mistakes that I can't even read it. Consciously. Jan consciously ignored her dad's calls so she could spend more time playing games. Offend. Stephanie's jokes about Ryan's appearance and voice offended him and made him feel uncomfortable. Imagine. I can't imagine what it's like to have to sleep on the streets. It must be so hard. Commit. The man who committed the attack ran away, but the police found him and arrested him. Detect. I can't detect the difference between these foods. Can you taste anything different?
智慧小补帖
Gay. Indigenous. Discriminate. Accidentally. Behavior.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作。活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net